Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 229 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. We're brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renna, and the show notes are located at continuefit.com. All right, on today's show for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about some forum threads, including knee pain during the slide board curls. Getting a lot of questions about knee pain lately. And we talked about some business threads, kind of got into it a little bit. Talked about Vince Gabriel's should you focus on athletes or adults, and some other business topics. Speaking of business, for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Rachel Cosgrove is on to answer, how do you keep your emotions stable in your business? For the Functional Movement System segment, John Tureen is back to talk about his segments on return to play. Today is about constructing your baseline system. We got a new segment with Train Heroic. I know I've been doing the ad for them lately because you know I'm using them, and they were sponsoring the Hit the Gym, which is a Strength Coach segment, but now we wanted to get them to do some more education for you guys. So we're going to bring you the Train Heroic data-driven coaching segment. Today, Adam Doughty is on. He's going to open it up with talking about readiness surveys and athlete monitoring. Readiness surveys were something that Train Heroic added lately. So looking forward to this series and this segment coming up. All right, for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, we got something a little bit different. We have two strength coaches on to talk about their work in MMA. Mike Perry from the Skill of Strength in Chelmsford, Mass., and Kyle Holland, who is a tactical performance coach specialist with EXOS. This started from a Facebook thread by Henry Lau asking, why is it that some MMA pros can get away with what we think of as poor training, yet still win fights? So we talked to Kyle and Mike about that. We talked about the importance of developing various qualities of a fighter and what those qualities are. Programming, is it too complex the way people make it? Managing injuries, which happens a lot, and changes in program design, and so much more with those two. Fun segment with Mike and Kyle. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ant. How are you?
All right, hanging in there. You know what? We sent out a newsletter yesterday just because, we've been getting, again, and I don't know if it goes in waves but knee pain is definitely, it's not going away for any of us, I think. Any of us over 50 anyway. But no, in this industry, we always get, you're getting questions all the time. You got a question about somebody posting in the rear foot elevated split squat, and then you had posted you had recommended an article about kind of this idea about talking to our athletes about pain, and really that was more of a physical therapy article than anything. But then we had this other one, the knee pain during slide board curls, which I thought was interesting. And the caveat is it was post injury. He was injured before, and it was really kind of this idea about people having pain in that post-injury, because you had really not seen any pain in the slide board curl. So I just kind of wanted you to go over, I know your progression is, you start out with eccentric slide board, right? And then you go into regular slide board back and forth with concentric, but you don't really use the ball anymore.
No, we don't use the ball anymore. We don't use, there aren't a whole lot of, there's not a ton of stability ball usage anymore in general in the gym with us, which is kind of interesting to sort of see how things morph over time. And, but I do like the ball as a regression for leg curls only because of the angle. You end up basically, if you're looking, when you've got slide board leg curl, you're probably, let's say, if you're 30 degrees to the ground at the top. And when you go up on the stability ball, you probably start at about 45. And that does make it easier. The problem is, and it's funny, I'm going to go in, I'll send you the video. I'm going to go in and film a video. I couldn't find a video of the peanut-shaped ball, but I think I still do have a peanut-shaped ball in the gym that I keep just for that, because Umran, who made I believe that's how he pronounced his name, who had made the original post, said it didn't hurt, but it was more unstable. And so, you've got this, you're kind of trading one thing for the other. You're trading being higher up for the side-to-side movement and your kind of inability to control, say, movement in the transverse or the frontal plane. But if you get one of these peanut-shaped balls, now you've got you're up higher, so you're taking some of the load off the hamstrings and making it effectively easier, lighter, whatever. And then, you're not losing that stability aspect, because the peanut-shaped ball will basically only roll in the sagittal plane. So it seemed like an easy solution. And he said that didn't hurt. And that usually, I always go back to sort of, you've got a case of weakness. I think that's what we saw. You know what I mean? Like, slide board leg curl hurts. He gets pain in his hamstring, but he goes to stability ball leg curl, which is really just less load, doesn't hurt. And I think more than likely, whether he, increases his reps or does something, whatever he does, I would think relatively quickly he'll be back on the slide board pain-free, because he'll have strengthened that thing up enough to the point where it will now be able to handle that increased load.
And it's funny, because we're going to talk some business in a little bit, but one of the things that really annoys me with some people, not Umran, but is I don't have this piece of equipment, or I don't have that piece, or we only have dumbbells up to 7 pounds or whatever. It's like, you can own a gym, get your shit, get stuff that you need. But a lot of people won't have the peanut shape one. Have you thought about the TRX or any suspension?
It's funny, I almost posted that video of like a TRX body curl, because it's the same idea.
Yeah.
And it's, different but same in terms of a little bit easier. So yes, I have thought about the TRX, but I like the body curl, like where you hold with your arms and then you kind of execute a leg curl from there, because I found that to be a little bit easier too, as opposed to like feet up in the TRX, which I think is a little bit harder to do. I never loved that, trying to get my feet somehow comfortably into the TRX. But the body curl version, and I'll try to see if I can post the body curl version in that thread, is something that I do like. But the thing that you said with the peanut ball, it's like $20, $29 or something like that. You go on Amazon, you order it, and the next day you got it. Boom, blow it up, get it going. I always look, and I was thinking about this because I'm doing a talk for Fitness Together. I'm going to speak at their annual conference down in Florida. And one of the things I was thinking about in my notes is the idea I talked about when I read First Break All the Rules. One of the things that they talk about in First Break All the Rules is, do I have the equipment necessary to do my job? And I tell our staff that all the time. If there's something that you need that costs less than $100, we need to get it. We shouldn't be not able to do our job because, we don't have, like, we were doing bottoms up kettlebell presses yesterday, and one of the girls that I was with was like, do we have 10-pound kettlebells? And I'm like, yeah, we do. Because now we've got, actually kilos, sorry, we've got 4 kilos, 6 kilos. We got all the half sizes, because initially, the kettlebells were just 4K jumps. So that was a lot. It was, 8.8 pound jumps. So it's tough to think, okay, I'm going to go from the 16s to the 20s for overhead press, or, I'm going to try to bottoms up press. I can bottoms up press an 8, but I can't bottoms up press a 12. And those are relatively inexpensive purchases that you should make right away. Okay, these are things that are going to help us do our job better and help our coaches and our trainers do their job better. Why should we be constrained? I said, if it's like $1,000, if we need another Kaiser, okay.
Yeah.
Think about that. But, we need a peanut-shaped ball, or we need you said 2 more, another set of dumbbells even.
Yeah. If it's that, I always like what Coach Dose would always talk about with anything that comes in the market. Don't just dabble. Like, okay, look at it, decide if you're going to put it in your program, and then go for it. Like, if you're just going to dabble, then go do something else. But otherwise, go buy the equipment and do your thing.
Yeah, no, you're right.
So let's stay on this idea of business, because I mean we've been getting a lot of business questions too, which is funny, which is good, I think, because trainers know they need the additional revenue stream, and as well as I really feel like more guys end up wanting and ladies want to open up their own place. We had Vince Gabriel. He wrote a great article on should you focus on athletes or adults, and coincidentally, my next Strength Coach TV is at Vince's place. And it's this beautiful, immaculate place. And, it's a little bit of a contrast from the last one, because the last one, he started out training mostly athletes. And, he was talking about this idea about the different seasons with athletes and how it can be frustrating, and there's drop-offs in seasons. And a lot of times, fitness people aren't the best with numbers, financials. And he was talking about getting this membership idea to this one specific target market, whatever that may be. The most important thing we need to do in our business is focus. And if we focus athletes 50% and then adults 50%, we'll always be in the middle. The middle is no man's land. You're not 50-50 for sure, but just talk to us about this idea, because we've gotten, Rhonda Cat had asked a question about splitting the facility or athletes working alongside of General Pop. Can you just kind of jump into this area a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it made me think. So again, I'm not ready to abandon our athlete business by any stretch of the imagination. I do believe, and I've always said, we run 3 businesses all out of the same facility. We have personal training, we have adult small group training, we have athlete training. But I think what we do have to reconsider during the fall, winter, we get young hockey groups, kids of groups of 10 to 12, boys 11 to 14 years old. And there's a bunch of those groups. There might be 50 or 60 of those kids that are coming in once a week. In the winter, in December and January, we get kids from Winchester Youth Soccer, same kind of thing, training once a week. And I started looking at that and saying, okay, are these things impeding what we're doing, or are they, kind of priming the pump from a customer standpoint? So I actually sent Vince's article out to everybody, like Steve Bigelow and Ken and Bob and Carrie that runs the office, and said, hey, we got to at least think about this and say, even though, we're not going to cancel our after-school athlete groups, no chance, but we do have to look and say, are there times when we unnecessarily crowd the facility and kind of piss off our adult members, and for no real good reason? The problem is, I think, if you do sort of what Vince is saying, then you end up, like, to me, we'd be going backwards, because we are getting close to 50-50 now in terms of revenue between adults. But we've got I wrote it in one of the other threads, I forget which one, but we've got a really nice time usage set up in terms of we have kids really from 3 to 6 now. And that's it. 6 o'clock, the adults start coming in. So we're really training adults from 5:15 a.m. until 11 a.m. And then we're training kids from 3 to 6. Then we're training adults again from 6 to 8. And there's some, mesh points, but it's not a situation where someone's thinking, oh, there's so many kids here, I can't get near the equipment that I want, or that type of thing, or the music is wrong, or the energy is wrong, or that. And I think, so I guess, even though it may not make me change what we're doing, it's a pretty good reminder, and it makes me sit back and examine and say, okay, even though we're being successful, should we maybe think about, do we need the soccer kids? And it was funny, Steve Bigelow wrote this great, he writes me an email, I don't care one way or the other, but, and then proceeds to send me like a full page about why he thinks it's a really good idea to keep the soccer kids there. And I was like, geez, I'd hate to see what you'd wrote if you did care. I said, because the fact that you didn't care, and then I got a full page, if this was something you were really passionate about, we'd have a problem. And, but it was great because it got guys to think, some of the guys, Steve and Ken, and some of the guys that are there more than I am now in the afternoons, were saying, hey, it's not a problem. We're not kind of in conflict with the adults. We're not in a situation where the adults are not getting what they're paying for because we've got so many kids running around. And that's my big concern. And that I said the same thing to Bob about the hockey groups. I think we've got to do a better job of kind of slotting the hockey groups in, because we do end up, and that's why I don't like when you go back to, sort of like the Dave Gleason, Jeremy Frisch model, where you've got, 7 to 10-year-olds in the gym. sometimes for us, when those hockey groups get in there, it takes on a very daycare kind of feel where we're spending a lot of time barking out orders, get in line, hands to yourself, stuff that we don't generally do. So it was good. I thought it was a very good, it was a great article for the site and a really good article for me, kind of personally, business-wise.
Mike, you think also, I think one thing you always talk about is flow. And I went, coincidentally, after that, I went to Reach Your Potential training, Bobby Smith, who you know, who had opened that originally with Adam Fight. They do probably one of the best jobs from that perspective. I mean, they literally go in a line, kind of like the graph you or the place you pointed like to the Body by Boyle model, the Thrive. I guess that was a Thrive model where they walk in one door and it's almost like they're coming out the other. And he's got it down. Bobby was like, "Well, the warm up is 9 minutes, and then they're over here for 7 minutes." I mean, they really have that dialed down. So if you do have that situation, now they're 92% athletes, and he knows that number. He doesn't open up until 3 o'clock, and they might have some people in the morning, but 92% athletes, huge facility. But I think the flow has a lot to do with it. Another thing Vince was talking about, which I thought was important, was this idea of like a little bit of the atmosphere. Is it clean? Is it does it smell? Are things, I know things are put away in your facility for sure. But there was this idea about kind of with the athletes, this idea that the facility didn't look as good. It was much harder to maintain. And that was also driving, because I know you've talked about that atmosphere again with the kids being in there and the adults just feeling like there's this daycare idea. Just touch on that and that piece of the flow and the atmosphere for the adults.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do a pretty good job with flow, but it's not perfect because, like, for us, we're in and out of the back room. It's sort of like ours is kind of like this. It's like it goes in and then it comes back through the door and back out again, just based on the way the fact that we took the second side 5 years in. It's like you really couldn't redesign the whole place and say, okay, let's redesign this now and make the flow better. It was sort of let's just figure out how to make it work so that it does in fact work. But I look at like Bobby's model and I think there's a huge inefficiency there when you're opening at 3 because you're paying rent 24 hours a day. Like I look at our model now and think, particularly with the morning groups and all that stuff, it's just extra money. It's extra revenue. And the thing that Vince says, and this is where Vince is dead on, and this is what Bob Hanson, obviously my partner, loves, is that adults, particularly when you get into like a monthly EFT kind of thing, are guaranteed money. And you're not always looking for them. Whereas, and this is what Vince alluded to, it's like, okay, hockey and basketball start, all my athletes are gone at Thanksgiving. I need to find another whole group of athletes. So if I'm Bobby, I need to come back and find that 92% of my business again every season. And it's not that easy. We did it, and we did it for years and years and years that way. But I will still say that it's not that easy, in that it's much nicer when you know, okay, I've got, X thousands of dollars a month coming in from these adult groups that we're doing. And that's how it is even from us. Personal training. I mean, personal training, I used to always think like the Plumber or Alan Cosgrove kind of thing of, oh, don't do one-on-one training. One-on-one training is dead. And I'm like, we make a lot of money off one-on-one training, and it's profitable in the sense that if we're charging $85 an hour and we're paying the trainer $30, there's $55 an hour that's there to cover expenses, whatever. I mean, it's still a pretty good, it's like one of those, I'm not turning that away. I'm not saying we're not doing that.
By the way, I think that was a Plumber thing, because Alan will always say, you never turn anybody down.
Right.
That's nothing. So he would always, they took one-on-one. It was just a little more expensive because with the semi-private, it was obvious.
Right. But then Thomas would got to go to the top. Yeah, charge $300 an hour for one-on-one, so people don't want to do it. And I'm like, I just, it's a bad business model. I really think if someone said to me, what's the ideal model? The ideal model is to have all three of those things running at the same time, because you can afford to pay your coaches much more money. Coaches can make a much better living because, again, if you're doing that athlete only model, 90% athletes, now everybody's working hourly and you can't pay them $30 an hour. I mean, that's a lot of money. You start looking at that and thinking, can I afford to do that? Can I just bring coaches in and pay them 60 grand to work? You know, do I even have 40 hours for them if we're starting at 3? I mean, you think 3 to 9, it's only 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
6 days a week, that's 36 hours. I mean, it's basically not a full-time job when you're doing that. And that was all the stuff that we kind of ran into. And that was why we started. It was like personal training was basically people calling up, hey, Mike, can you train me? No, I can't. But, Ed Lippy can. And, so we give that guy to Ed Lippy, and all of a sudden Ed Lippy's got 10 hours of personal training during the week where he's making $30 or $40 an hour, and he's making $300 or $400 a week, over those 10 hours. And then it's a lot easier for him to work for a little bit less money doing his coaching hours, which is what we hired him for. The thing that we run into, the problem we get into is that once people start getting the $30 an hour work, then they don't want the other stuff. And that's our biggest problem, is making people understand that, no, we hired you in a very much like a 50-50 relationship. Half of your job will be personal training, which is at a higher hourly rate. Half of your job will be group training, which is at a lower hourly rate. And you need to do one. If you don't do A, you don't get B. But we get people who've been there for a while who think, I only want to do A. And then we have to make that decision like, okay, Anthony's a great trainer. He's got 31 on 1 appointments a week. He doesn't want to coach groups anymore. And in my opinion, fine. If you're making me that kind of money, if your clients like you and you've got 30 appointments a week and you're thinking you want to go to 40 and just do personal training, go for it. I'll hire somebody else to pick up your hours. And that's kind of what we've done. So it's sort of an interesting metamorphosis of your business as you go forward. And I'll be very interested to see someone like Bobby, 5 years from now. Is he suddenly saying, I'm getting a lot of adult revenue? Because the other thing I started reading a book called Longevity Economy. That sort of, the group of people who know they have kids, but their kids have kids, they have grandkids, they're 50, they're 60. That group is ever increasing, and they got money to spend, and they want to do this stuff. They want to train in a really good environment. They want the best trainers. So that's a huge kind of this continually exploding market for us. We literally have, Bob went away for a couple of weeks, and we had a pile of personal training requests on his desk to sort of dole out. Okay, we got to get these people called back and get them assigned, and we're not even advertising.
Yeah. Sometimes, we can't always go by you. Obviously, because you have that residual buildup of the Mike Boyle name, right? So it is hard to kind of compare what you guys are doing sometimes because of, it is such a big operation.
And I think we would fall I would look at us and say, we're a mature business.
Mm-hmm.
We've been there for a long time, and we do have kind of a base of goodwill that is built up. And I'm not going to complain about that. I'm not going to say that's a bad thing, but it's one of those things. But interesting, the flip side of that is, I always say to people, don't use that as an excuse either. And I think sometimes that's when people say, we can't do that. We're not Mike Boyle, and my Perform Better. I'm going to do the keynotes at the Perform Better Summits. And one of the things that I'm going to do is talk about the process of, Mike Boyle becoming Mike Boyle, or Mark Verstegen becoming Mark Verstegen, or Todd Durkin becoming, nobody was who they are in the beginning. None of us were. This isn't like royalty where we were born into this. Everybody had to kind of, get their hustle on and do some stuff that maybe they didn't want to do in the beginning. And I think that's where sometimes people will default very quickly to, we can't do that. I'm like, well, if you think you can't do that, you'll never be able to do that. You'll never get to the point that we're at if you look at us and think that, I can't get to the point where you're at. It's like any business, I think, is that way. If the Uber guys hadn't looked and said, I don't think that cab thing is working. Who would have thought 10 years from, if someone had said, some guy's going to develop an app, ride-sharing app, where you dial it up, and then some guy comes and picks you up in his own car and drives you around like a taxi driver. Every one of us would have said, that's a stupid idea.
Yep.
I think you can pull that off. let me know how that works for you.
Yeah. Well, Michael Hyatt would call that a self-limiting belief, and you need to turn it into a liberating truth, right?
Exactly.
Remember
And
that.
that's absolutely 100% true. And I think that's one of the things that people have to do is try to decrease their self-limiting beliefs and try to decrease their negative self-talk.
Yep.
And realize that, look at it and think, well, why can't I do what, people say, I'll never be able to do what you've done. I'm like, why? I mean, and then I look, but I always look at everybody, hey, if you got 30 years, you can do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what's funny is I'll finish on this note is obviously, I have the book coming out on success in the fitness industry, interviewing 50 of, considered the top fitness professionals. And, first of all, they're still all working hard. I'm still calling you every 2 weeks. We're still working on strengthcoach.com. You're still going to MBSC. You're still doing stuff for CSFC. You're still going. You're still grinding it. You're still trying to figure this thing out. Same thing with most of the people that I interviewed are really in the same boat and still feeling like they don't feel like they're a success, right? Most of them, probably 90% of them. So
yeah, I was going to say, it's funny because that's what I said. Like, I used to, I always said to people, the 4-hour work week is bullshit. Like, that's a bullshit book. And Tim Ferriss, obviously brilliant guy, great marketer, whatever, but I don't know anybody that does that. I don't know one successful person that does that.
Yeah.
Not one. And, and it's like, and like I said, and I know most of the successful people that I know are still kind of nervous about it and still thinking, okay, well, I need to, I'm looking at this and thinking, hey, I got to make it, to 2023 to get Mark to college.
Yeah.
So
it's amazing. All right, Coach. Well, we got to let you go back and start get some money because college by then will be pretty expensive. So thanks for doing this.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure.
All right. All right, guys, right now at Perform Better, there is free shipping on orders over $59. Restrictions do apply, so check out the site for more info. All the best sellers right now and free shipping on orders over $59. The next one-day seminar is in Atlanta on Saturday, April 28th. Josh Henkin, Charlie Weingroff, Martin Rooney, and our very own Mike Boyle. You can check them out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars.
Everybody, it's Rachel Cosgrove with the Business of Fitness segment with Results Fitness University. And I had a question about, and this is a tough one, how do you keep your emotions stable in your business? And I think as a leader, as an owner in our business, especially as your business starts to grow and as you have a lot of people depending on you, you have your team, you have your clients, you have a lot to manage. It's one of the number one skills to work on, to get good at in your business is to learn how to manage your emotions, learn how to compartmentalize, and really set the energy for your company. And I think the most successful leaders, business owners, CEOs are the ones who do this really well and really, show their team that they're in control, that that they are able to manage their emotions. And so I know, for some new business owners, this can be a tough thing to learn, especially, when you're in the beginning and you might have, a lot of emotional highs and lows, whether the bank account's, not quite as looking as good as you want it to, or maybe you're working just long hours and you're being tested, or maybe, you just had somebody quit or you had a client complain or, all kinds of things that we get bombarded with as the owner leader of our business. And so how do we really keep ourselves, where you can maintain and manage those emotions? So number one, remember, your energy sets the mood for everybody in your company. So it is important that you have some kind of a ritual as you head into your business before you turn that doorknob of your business. You need to do something to really get yourself in the right mindset. So, especially, those when you have a brick and mortar company within those four walls, you've got to always be consistent with your moods and with who you are. If you are up and down and your team don't quite know, they can't predict each day how you're going to be when you walk through those doors, that's not a good sign. And that's not going to help you to build your business. And so, if some days they're like, oh, he or she's in a great mood, and other days, you're raving lunatic, then it's really going to create that instability amongst your team. So number one, your energy sets the mood for everyone. So start to figure out, what do you need to do to get yourself where you're in the right mindset to enter into your four walls. Second, just keep this in mind: when emotions are high, intelligence is low. And this is actually when, even in your personal life, if you're getting emotional about something, if you feel yourself starting to bubble up with emotions, that's probably a good time to take a step away and go for a walk, take a deep breath, probably not engage in a continued conversation or argument, because you're probably going to say something that you're going to regret. So just as a rule of thumb, especially in your business, it's your own business, what you do at home. But in your own business, as you are interacting with your team and with, the people you're managing, and even your clients as well, the people who are paying you, if you start to feel your own emotions start to, boil, and maybe they've said something that's kind of got under your skin, or maybe there's something from earlier in your day that's, just really, putting the hairs up on your back, disengage and take a moment and, take a deep breath, go for a walk, get yourself, again, go back to whatever your ritual is of getting your mindset in the right place. And, just never continue that conversation to where, you let those emotions start to affect the conversations and, the things that you're going to say, because just remember that when emotions are high, intelligence is low. And the last skill to really learn is learning how to compartmentalize. You might have something going on personally that you really want to be careful not to carry that into your business. And so, if you do have stuff that's going on personally that you end up bringing into the business, now you've affected your business, your team, your clients. So really learning how to compartmentalize and kind of, put those emotions into a box, and then stepping into your company, making sure that, have that mindset that you need to run your company. So this is a skill that does take practice, and it's something that, it was a question that I had at our mentorship last week. And so I thought, this is a really good, topic, because it's something that will set you apart as a business owner and a leader, and it will really make you a better, not only manager, but leader of your company, so that you can grow your company to the next level. So start to work on that skill. If you find you're not good at it, it's something that you can get better at with practice. So, keep practicing and just keep those things in mind. Hopefully that helps you guys, and we'll talk to you again on the next segment, and have a great month, everybody. And if you want to check in on resultsfitnessuniversity.com, that's where we keep our up-to-date schedule of everything we have coming up to change the way fitness is done. So we hope to see you at a future event.
Welcome to the Functional Movement System segment. My name is John Turin. In part one, we spoke broadly about criteria and baselines in return to play, and we did it with quite a few open-ended questions for you to ponder. Part two, I'd like to look at some pieces for constructing your baseline and system and offer some things for you to consider. So the next step is actually establishing the baseline. This is important. You will have your minimum standards of clearance. These should be as close to non-negotiable as it gets. You may also know the performance level of excellence. This has an objective and subjective line to it, but this is the level of excellence or heights that you're working toward. It's not the minimum standard of clearance. This is the long-term vision of how excellent can we get. I'm growing toward my best, and I know the minimums required. Now we can establish the baseline, and we can screen and test those out. We need to know where we are today. Where do we stand as we sit here today? The baseline is important and should not be underestimated. It is a starting point, and it is the point to refer back to. When you constantly and consistently refer back to the baseline, you create a very nice feedback loop to know if the work that you're doing is purposeful and has gained improvement or not, and you can adjust from there. We don't take baselines to show off how strong somebody got or how mature they got between the ages of 17 and 20. We use the feedback loop to keep moving forward and making decisions based on objective material. In functional movement systems, our second principle is called protect, correct, and develop. When you have a baseline, you now know what needs to be protected or what needs to be kept safe and who the best person that can help do that. We know what needs to be corrected, and we also know what can be developed and worked on. So this is what the baseline allows us to split up not only parts and patterns, but personnel and folks working with the athlete. We always refer back to the baseline. It's a process. Matt Campbell, the football coach at Iowa State University, said, you fall in love with the process, eventually the process will love you back. The process is tough. You stick with the process, eventually the process will love you back. If you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, they've been around since the 1930s. Many of us have heard of something called the 12 steps in AA. What we know about the 12 steps is this. If you go through 11 steps and not the 12, there's a high probability you'll be back, unfortunately. You must go through all 12 steps and lower the probability that you'll return. This is a process, time-tested and proven. So can you stand on the table and say with conviction, yeah, she's ready to go, or no, she is not ready to go? Are you willing to do that? Do you have the objective data to show that you can say that? So let's look at clearing and how we clear from the markers. We spend a lot of time asking ourselves what really matters. You know, when we peel back, what really matters in our training or getting people ready to go play the thing that they love to do. It's not the weight room, it's getting ready to play the sport, the activity, the recreation that they love to do. Here's what we do know. Nobody has too much time, too much money, or too much support. So that's a really important question to answer. What matters? As the great John Wooden told us, don't mistake activity for achievement. What matters? So what is our baseline of clearance? What is the turnstile to enter the ride? You have a ticket, you're tall enough, you don't have a heart condition, you're not pregnant, go through the turnstile, buckle up, and get on the ride. Here are the steps of clearance that give us accountability to not only the system of return to play, but to each other, to the athlete most importantly, and to the team working around the athlete. And that can be a team that's involved in a child that's 7 years old, right on up to the professional level. We obviously first have the medical or physician clearance. Hey, this person's cleared on the table. They can protect themselves from themselves. Their tendons, joints, ligaments, and bones are cleared. We have our rehabilitation professionals, our PTs, ATCs, and other folks in this space. There should be particular measurements in place, particular ratios based on objective measures that say yes or not quite there yet. From a strength and conditioning or performance coach standpoint, we look at body composition. We look at breathing screens and grip. This goes back to the most basics of neurodevelopmental sequence of breathing and grip. We look at the functional movement screen. Is this person in pain still? Do they have high levels of dysfunction? We use the motor control screen or Y balance test. We look at general performance metrics, such as those in the fundamental capacity screen. Of course, we look at conditioning metrics. And then there are certain, obviously, sport or activity performance parameters that require to go back. Maybe there's pitching velocity. Maybe it's a 5-10-5, whatever that is for the sport. We know that there's great sport coaches out there and other personnel that have objective criteria that can help us. So objective criteria with known minimums and baselines in place, you can begin to work. You say, wow, John, that seems overwhelming. Who's got time for all that? Again, as John Wooden, the great UCLA basketball coach, said, if you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to do it over? I'll tell you what is overwhelming. Re-injury. Mentally, emotionally, trust, cost, the future, anxiety, more medications. Many problems exist in re-injury. You say to me, John, I have other thoughts on tests and baselines. How can I build my system? You say, I've been doing this a long time. I can just look at someone and know. Great, that may be. If you have that lens, your eyes and experience, that's terrific. But what if you have the sniffles that day? Can you teach someone else around your system for the betterment of the athlete? So the framework to build the system out, we would encourage you, number one, to begin with the end in mind. What does success look like for this person? What is their baseline? What is the process and strategies to support where we're going? Remember, your methods and strategies can and likely will change, which is why we have baselines and why we have criteria. So when we construct the process, we simply ask ourselves this. Number one, what can we take away or remove that's not necessary? Let's simply fill it. Are we correcting a leg raise that doesn't need to be? Are we doing speed training with somebody that runs a 4.44 40 already? Don't try to control the uncontrollable. What do we just need to accept? What do we need to lean into? What just is? And what ingredients will go in? What things will we use? And so the way I see our job is to identify the barriers that might impede the person's ability to learn, to breathe, to rehab, to train, to practice, and play. Well, there's a lot to that. Where do you go? What do you do first? Ryan Holiday wrote a great book called The Obstacle is the Way. In it, he says, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. What he means by this is go to the kink in the hose. We've got the hose turned on. There's nothing coming out the front end. We've all gone down the hose and seen either a kink that happened naturally or a funny friend holding a kink. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Go to the kink in the hose and unkink it. So get your criteria, your system. You've got your baseline. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Athlete has a poor single leg hop. Athlete has a poor anterior reach. An athlete has a poor leg raise and a locked up ankle. Go to the locked up ankle. See if we can get that out. Sometimes simply getting that out in one session can improve everything previously mentioned. Go to the impediment to advance action. We don't just jump train her first. We go to the impediment, we deduce down, and then we clean it up. That was a broad view of some ways to think about a framework and a return to play model. Our hope is you continue to refine yours for the good of the athlete, not for your Instagram accounts, not to set records of how many weeks you were able to beat the numbers to clear, but for the good of the athlete. That's it for today. In part 3, we'll look at some of the realities that exist in return to play as we learn from parts of real life. My name is John Turin, and this has been Functional Movement System segment. For more information, please check out functionalmovement.com.
Hi, welcome to the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment. My name's Adam Doughty. All of us at Train Heroic are really excited to bring you a brand new educational segment on the world of data in coaching. We're going to dig into readiness surveys a bit today, but let's start with something else to help make all this athlete monitoring stuff make a little bit of sense. Let's use driving as an example. You got a lot of experience driving your car. You don't even hit that much stuff anymore, but you don't do that blindly. You've got all your senses, and there's a bunch of info right on the dash that tells you about the status of your car. A lot of them even have tire pressure sensors to let you know about those slow leaks before they actually go flat. You're getting feedback, and you're monitoring your car. The speed goes up, and you can slow down. You got a warning in the dash? Well, you can check it out. It's really helpful to know about those small problems before it becomes a big one. But how does that relate to training? Well, sometimes your program's chugging along, but you've got athletes who are stressed out or for whatever reason they've been feeling run down lately. Are they going to adapt to your program like you want? Are they going to do their best when it matters? Maybe, but we can be sure that it doesn't give them the best chance. But what if you had a little warning light that said, hey, coach, maybe you want to pay a little extra attention to that guy. Something might be off with him. Well, that's where athlete monitoring really comes in. You got a lot of experience building your programs, but what about those times when things just kind of pop up? You can plan well for your group, but you can't always predict the hiccups that might happen to people along the way. Monitoring is like having another sense. It gives you more information about your program and your athletes and how they're dealing with the training stress and other stresses in their lives. Knowing about it lets you do something about it and makes you a more powerful coach. Readiness surveys are just a type of monitoring that gives you some really helpful information. You can learn a little bit about their lives outside of training. For example, as coaches, we all know how important sleep is to performing your best. But are they getting enough? Well, you can find out, and asking them shows them it's important. Another great thing about these surveys is that they can do a great job of telling you about the way an athlete's handling the training load you're throwing at them. People are different, and they sometimes just respond differently to training. These are things you can't necessarily control, but you can guide your athletes toward doing the things that keep them on the path to success. Coaches jump right into assuming that they'd have to change the program if something comes up. Sometimes adjustments might be necessary, but there's a ton of other stuff that might come up and might be the problem. Poor scores for energy and mood, for example, when you haven't even pushed them that hard, that might say it's not your program. Maybe they're not eating like they should. It could be something else. The point is, you can find out. Ultimately, this is about understanding what's going on, and you can take whatever steps you think are best to make your athletes as successful as possible. At Train Heroic, we did a ton of research and talked to our top coaches to design a survey for you that's valid, useful, and easy for your athletes to fill out. The survey is kind of old school? Well, sure, but that doesn't mean they're not great. According to all the research that's out there, survey scores actually can do a better job of telling you about the state your athletes are in than expensive tests like blood draws. All of that in a relationship-building tool that takes seconds to complete. You know, it turns out your athletes can tell you an awful lot about how they're doing. You just have to ask. That's going to do it for today. You can go to trainheroic.com to start your 14-day trial. When you're on your coaching call with one of our team members, make sure you tell them the Strength Coach podcast sent you for a 10% discount off the first year of the Pro Edition.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with a Strength Coach. And today I have a special segment. I have two strength coaches on. And one is Mike Perry from the School of Strength in Chelmsford, Mass. And the other is Kyle Holland. And Kyle is out of Savannah, Georgia. And he's a tactical performance specialist with EXOS. Boys, thanks for doing this.
Hey, thanks for having us, Anthony.
Thanks for having us on. We appreciate it.
You know, I'll just give everybody a little bit of context of like how this happened. So Henry Lau posted on Facebook a question about working with MMA people, or actually I think one of his, and I'll read it, one of his clients or friends they were arguing about whether or not you should follow some of what the MMA pros are doing. And so it started a little bit of an argument. And Mike said, I could spend 2 hours on that. And then Kyle jumped in and said, yeah, I could spend another 2 hours. And, you know, and you guys were saying, we should do a podcast. And I said, you know what? I have a podcast. Why don't I invite them on? So here we are.
You're making us back it up, Anthony. You're making us back it up.
Exactly. You know what was really nice was that you guys did not elaborate in that post. So that makes it even better. So I will read the post Henry posted. And basically said someone recently argued with him that since they based their skills training off of MMA pros, and he thought that was a good idea. Henry thought it was a horrible idea. And, you know, he said, look, their schedule may not be a contributor to why they're a pro. You know, that he sees individuals doing the wrong things, quote unquote, in their training, yet they still win fights. He's heard some horror stories in terms of training with some UFC pros, yet they were still winning fights at the top level. And, you know, and then he asked the question, what do you guys think? Why is it that some MMA pros can get away with what we think is poor training, yet still win fights? First of all, I don't know what Henry's means by poor training, so we don't have that defined. Obviously, we see some crap on the internet, but I don't want to make any judgments. And you know, in our pre-interview here, Kyle was talking about, you know, look, a lot of times the strength coaches, we're judging strength coaches unfairly, and that strength coaches are put in a no-win situation. So, Kyle, I want you to start out with this question of, you know, why can MMA pros get away with what we think of as poor training and yet still win fights? And are we judging strength coaches unfairly in who work with MMA pros?
Yeah, I think just like you said about Henry's post, you know, wrong is kind of a tough way to look at it because each guy is different. So each guy is gonna need different things, and a lot of the times, right, you know, what we would consider right is just not very sexy training. So it's probably not gonna make a very good YouTube video. You know, and it's hard to debate all these different points about training over a Facebook post. You know, it's kind of like the rule, like, don't talk about, you know, religion, politics, or strength training on Facebook because there will be a million comments. So it's really hard. But I mean, to say what what makes a guy win a fight or what's, even win a football game for a football player, it's kind of like, an unanswerable question. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it, but, really the right stuff is usually the big basic strength exercises, which I'm sure we'll get into, and Mike will talk about here in a second, but, it's just that stuff doesn't make good YouTube videos. When we had countdown shows come into Boyle's and train us or tape us training Kenny Florian and Joe Lozon and Tom Lawler, they would never want to see the trap bar deadlifts and the farmer's carries. They would always want to see, some crazy med ball variation. And they would usually literally just stop filming like in the middle of the workout and just start packing their bags up because it just wasn't very exciting. So, and strength and conditioning coaches, whether that be NFL, Major League Baseball, MMA, you're just not, when a guy does well, you're usually not getting, the credit, which I've been lucky because, my guys have given me some shout outs in the past. So that's really nice to feed my ego. But, when things go wrong, then you get blamed, for what it is. And this isn't meant to be a crying session, but it just kind of is what it is. It's you usually, and that's why we like being strength coaches. We're usually fine with the silence. But we have to kind of face the music when a guy loses, and we usually get some blame put on us. So that's kind of what I meant by us being judged unfairly.
Yeah. Kyle, and I'm going to ask Mike this too is in a second, right after Mike goes. But Kyle, what would you say? Would you say the majority of what you've seen, obviously, because you're in this game here, is there some bad, like the percentage of bad training, or are we just kind of looking at the gap and not the gain? Are we looking at what's bad and focusing on that? Do you see a lot of good strength training in general in MMA?
I don't want to sound like a jerk or come off, in a bad way, but I still think we're probably behind quite a bit. I mean, if you look across the sports, the NFL has been around for a really long time, and still there's kind of a mixed bag. Some people will tell you that the training in football is really bad still. So and even at the college level, I think we see good training, because we all follow, like-minded people, usually, especially strength coach podcast listeners. We're all kind of following the same crowd, which is usually people that are doing stuff that we consider right. So we'll see stuff and we'll think things are going in the right direction, but really in reality, that's behind it. And those are sports that have been around for a long time. And MMA is still a new sport, even though martial arts has been around since the dawn of time. This kind of blending of everything and people, developing fight teams and strength conditioning coaches jumping in. And really in the MMA world, you're not always getting, the most professional coaches or the most, sometimes there can be, people that are around that just aren't in the know on the right way to do things. So, I guess I'm trying to dance around the real answer, Anthony. It's probably, the answer is probably that there's probably more bad training out there than good.
Okay.
But I guess that's better for guys like me and Mike who have guys that are fighting, and it gives us a little bit of an edge.
Yeah. All right, Mike, the original question, why are some MMA pros getting away with what we think of poor training yet still win fights? And then your idea about this, the strength coach's role in terms of being put into a no-win situation.
Well, I think what it boils down to is we really have to think about genetics, right? And some of these athletes are just incredibly gifted athletes, right? And you just watch these guys move and they're incredibly fast, they're explosive, and they really did hit the genetic lottery, right? It seems like everything they do is effortless. And listen, you can't coach that, right? Sure, you can improve strength and you could probably improve some explosiveness and endurance and stuff like that. But man, when someone's gifted, when someone's a really gifted athlete, that's something that you really can't teach. And I've had guys in the gym, for a few guys that I've worked with for 4 to 5 years. And granted, we've been able to develop some of their qualities, but what it boils down to is, listen, we each have a certain hand that we're dealt when it comes to genetic gifts. And those guys, they can do just about anything and probably win fights. You can have them standing on a Bosu ball. You can have them doing all the silly exercises that most strength and conditioning coaches frown upon, right? The silly stuff, direct arm training, or whatever else it may be. And those guys are still going to win fights because they could be just incredibly gifted, or two, when it comes to the fight, they're just a gamer, right? They just know how to fight, and you put them in a scenario, you lock the cage, and they're ready to go. So there's just so many things that go into the role of a fighter that it's really tough to say. But man, I've got I'm currently working with a couple fighters that they don't spend much time in the gym from a strength and conditioning standpoint. And they've got, 8-2 records or 9-1 records. They're not quite at that UFC point yet, but these guys are winning fights. And who am I to say that they're doing it wrong when they're winning fights? So it's really a scenario where, it's some people are just meant to fight and some people are really just good at fighting. And it's kind of like those athletes. They may not be super impressive in the weight room, but come game time, they really know how to dial it up, and they're competitors. And that's just a huge part that we can't bottle. I wish we could, because if I did, I'd be a billionaire. But, it's one of those things where it's just multifactorial, and some fighters are just good at fighting and they're just gamers.
Yeah. Do you guys feel like, and you might already have this, like we need more structure in these teams, like a director of performance who kind of directs everything. Like I know in the golf world, everybody, the golf pro is the king, and then you have your medical team with a doctor, or whether that's a chiro and a PT, and then you have your physical team with whatever the trainer's doing. You have a mental coach, you have that type of stuff. Do you guys feel like it could be structured a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's kind of up to the individual team to be open-minded, and whoever serves as the head coach, which is usually a boxing coach or a jiu-jitsu coach. And really, if they come into it with an open mind, and the strength and conditioning coach can educate them a little bit on, hey, here's what we're thinking scheduling wise. Here's what we think is best for the fighter based on our background. And here's what I'm doing for him. Here's why the strength training is important. Then you can kind of work with schedules and try to be the strength conditioning coach that pushes that gets your guy more quality workouts in. I mean, we're kind of biased as strength coaches. We think, the strength conditioning workouts are the most important thing, yada, yada. But, the other coaches see it different. So I think it's our job to help educate them, and then kind of everybody comes together and makes the best schedule possible. Because really, I mean, the strength conditioning coach is never going to be, or at least we're pretty far away from being the head coach or the schedule maker or anything like that on an MMA team. So I think it's just our job to educate our guys as much as possible and work with them to try to get, the guy the most optimal schedule they can.
Yeah. So, I think what's different out here in New England is these guys cross-train so much. A lot of them don't have a home base. If you look at some of the bigger, MMA schools like, Jackson Wink or ATT, they have everybody in-house where they've got their head coach. It could be their head, whether it's their, MMA coach, then they've got their boxing coach and their wrestling coach and their jiu-jitsu coach, and maybe they have their strength and conditioning inside. A lot of those places are one-stop shops, so they really do get everybody in-house. For me, it's really tough because my guys are all over the place. I mean, I don't even want to know how many miles they're putting on their car each week. I mean, they're going from my place down to, Lausanne's place on the weekends to spar, to, another gym where they're doing their boxing, and then they're going into the city to get their jiu-jitsu. I mean, for us, it's really, really tough to coordinate everything because it's just so spread out. I've actually found that, the manager who works with most of my guys, Tyson Chartier, he's the guy that kind of coordinates everything, and he makes sure that we're all on the same page. And the beauty of what we've got going out here is that everybody trusts one another. So I know what's going on generally in their jiu-jitsu session or in their sparring sessions, and vice versa. They know what I'm doing here. So we really have a pretty good understanding of, what the end goal is, which is to try to get these guys to win on fight night. So it's actually worked out pretty well for us. Yeah.
And Anthony, real quick, just going off what Mike said, I find that too, it's one of those things where, on Joe's Lausanne's MMA site, he has a list of coaches, and then under my name, there's like this quote about, I used to always ask him, hey, how's your week going? And I used to always think, man, that is the wussiest quote. Like, I really wish he didn't have that under my name. Like, I thought that was a bad thing. But now after a while, I kind of, it's one of those things where you're just constantly trying to maybe ask the fighters like, hey, how's your week going? How do you feel? And then you're sort of stuck in doing damage control, On just trying to keep the wheels on the wagon until we get to fight night and try to put out the best fighter we can.
Well, yeah, and that's where I was going to go next, and we didn't talk about this earlier, but it kind of came up. I mean, we're also, there has to be, maybe it's the name strength coach. It needs to be changed, right? Because we're looking at, like, you guys are you need to be talking to them about sleep, about recovery, about other things. And, the strength training also is, we're trying to help them prevent injury. So it's not only things that we can always see carry over. Am I right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's, and everything is great. Like, when a guy doesn't have a fight coming up, you can get much more aggressive and really kind of get after him a little bit more and push him harder from a strength and conditioning standpoint. But yeah, you're right. When it comes fight time, it's basically, regen sessions, kind of less is more, taking the less is more approach and just trying to make sure that the guy gets to the finish line, because fight camps are brutal. I think it's hard. Football seasons are hard, baseball seasons are hard, but my goodness, fight camps. I mean, can you imagine, a lot of our athletes going through that, other athletes going through the rigors of a fight camp. I mean, it's really crazy what the guys have to put themselves through. So yeah, I think the goal is, once camp starts, it's like, hey, let's just keep these people healthy and make sure they can get to the contest and make a living for themselves. Yeah.
Mike, we had talked earlier when I had said, guys, what are we going to talk about? One of the things you were talking about is, these developing the various qualities of a fighter, because we're not training fighters. I mean, we're training fighters. We're not training power lifters. And, as we just talked about, some of the stuff that we do in the weight room doesn't always carry over to the cage or the mat. And I kind of always have this argument where there's still those specific things you guys need to work on. And like you had said, the various qualities of a fighter. Mike, start us off with this in your head. What are those various qualities of a fighter that you need to make sure you're taken care of as the strength coach?
Absolutely. So, I'll kind of answer this in a slightly different way. So when people think about strength and conditioning, right, they tend to think of performance. So if you're like, I have a strength and conditioning coach, a lot of people's minds go to like high performance training. But in the world of fighters, it's very different. It's more about keeping them healthy and keeping them whole. So yes, you're working with a high level athlete, but they may have a black belt in jiu-jitsu and they may be a high level striker, but their weight room I guess IQ and their weight room background is probably not that good. So a lot of the times we're just hammering the basics and trying to make sure that they're not jacking themselves up, right? And when it comes time to design their strength and conditioning program, I mean, I can't tell you how many times guys are coming in and they're not ready to deadlift or squat or split squat. There's some things we need to fix and improve upon before we start to do that. So it definitely is about managing things. But I also think that when it comes to developing these athletes, the numbers that you will see a lot of these fighters putting up would be sort of an average person's numbers, right? I mean, am I trying to get these guys to a, 3 or 4 times body weight deadlift? No. Am I trying to, get them to like a 3 times body weight, squat or even a double body weight back squat? No. I do have some basic guidelines. I consider these guidelines strong enough. And I think each individual has a sweet spot that as you get to know them, you figure out where they do well. But I really think that it's just about hammering the basics. And like Kyle was talking about, it's not sexy. They're going to come in, they're going to do some soft tissue. You're going to ask them how their week was. They're like, yeah, my knee, my elbow, my back's a little sore. They're going to do some prep and they're just going to get on and they're going to do some basic strength training. They're going to hit, their pull-ups and their deadlifts and their rows and their presses, etc. And then you're going to get on to some of their maybe, core and grip work and then finish up with some conditioning. So as far as, developing a ton of different qualities, I mean, obviously, the first thing is getting them to move well and trying to do your best to maintain their health. And then it's just really hammering the basics, right? Each of my guys that, like I said, has a little bit of a sweet spot. But, as far as everything else goes, obviously, the big things that I find is just making them strong enough to make sure that they're not injured. And we do have basic numbers. The biggest thing that I see personally with a lot of my fighters is they come in and they think they're very, very fit. And one of the reasons why they think that is because they're very efficient in specific skill sets like striking or jiu-jitsu. So if you take a black belt in jiu-jitsu, right, that's very, very technical and very, very efficient, it's going to be really hard for them to get tired on the mats unless they're working with another high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner that can challenge them. So oftentimes we need to put them in a scenario where we can get them out of their comfort zone and then train specific qualities. And for my guys, obviously cardio is a big part of it. We're not going to go crazy with energy system stuff, but the big thing I find with a lot of my guys is lower body endurance. Every time we take these guys through some basic assessments, they're like, man, my legs gave out. My legs gave out. That's the one thing that I've found that we try to attack early on is lower body muscular endurance. So that's why we do a lot of sled work, a lot of pulls, a lot of drags, a lot of crossover steps. And we don't want their lower body endurance to be a limiting factor. So that's a huge point of focus for what we do in the gym.
Cool. Kyle, why don't you tackle that idea of what you're looking at with this idea of various qualities of a fighter and how you're approaching this?
Yeah, absolutely. Mike hit the nail on the head, and I love following Mike on social media because he'll put out, he'll kind of show what some of the routines that he's taking guys through. And it makes me feel better because it's like, oh, this is just basic stuff. I know that the people in the industry that are doing a really good job, that we're doing similar stuff. So I like that. It makes me feel good. And Mike is right. A lot of times, even, professional football players, baseball players, the fighters, you'll go to a family reunion or you'll have people over for a holiday and they'll say, oh, it's so cool. You train, fighters or NFL players. And now, now I train special operations soldiers. I'm like, oh, those guys must lift a ton, or they must just be able to do, run so fast. And you're sitting there going, but, not really, like not much more than you would think. Because it's just not, you're really trying to just build them up overall, get the basics better. And they don't always move great either. Like Mike said, if you can get them moving a little bit better, then that's a win. But, the average, person, if you bring your uncle in to watch some workouts, he might not be all that impressed, watching these pro athletes walk around because, they don't really look like they move so well, outside of the cage or off the field. So I think you're really just trying to build up some of these basic qualities because, really they are very, very specialized machines, and taking an athlete and giving them more strength, giving them a bigger aerobic base, and what Mike said, just lower body endurance, which I've found is to be a big thing too. Those things never hurt. And just putting those basic qualities on somebody that's so specialized like these guys are really what's going to help them out, not some, quote, specialty exercise.
Yeah. And as far as the programming is concerned, Kyle, do you feel like you've seen this, they become over complex?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Because, if you train a football player or any football player or athletes from other sports that have kind of crossed over to MMA, I think everyone kind of steps back and goes, oh my gosh, wow, they're strong, or this guy's so much this, because they did it for years and years. With football players, there's a guy named Ovent St. Preux who used to play football at the University of Tennessee, and he's an MMA. And I think, a lot of people think, oh, he's really strong, he's really fit. Or at least I've heard that commentary before. And it's like, well, yeah, he had years and years of strength and conditioning in college. He had 4 years of what I think is, the biggest high performance environment you can have really is the NCAA in college football. Where I think they just have trained the basics over and over a little bit more than maybe an MMA fighter has, just because maybe they don't have that background in other sports, and maybe they've kind of gotten away from the basics and tried to do some other fancy stuff before they really had this bedrock of a real good solid strength and conditioning foundation. So I think maybe they jumped off and went into the specialty route a little bit too soon, and kind of like Coach Boyle says, when in doubt, choose strength and conditioning. And I think maybe guys have gotten off that path and where they really don't have those basic strength levels anymore like they used to.
Yeah. Like, can you give us an example, like a specific example of, we talked about how to approach training by looking at the total weekly volume of the athlete, because the problem is they have all these other it's called mixed martial arts for a reason. They're doing all these other things. Give us an example of how you kind of control that weekly volume and how that changes.
Well, I definitely don't control the weekly volume, but what I do is I adapt my programming to make sure that it integrates with the rest of their training appropriately. So, I mean, so the higher level guys that are in the UFC, their full-time job is to train, right? So they're able to wake up, do a strength and conditioning session, and then they may go back home and, eat, take a nap, get up, and train, maybe do some skill work in the afternoon and maybe some sparring at night. So, a lot of these guys, I just need to make sure that I understand their schedule, because there's going to be certain days of the week that is just more important, especially as we get closer to, fight week. And a lot of these guys, when they're in their live sparring, like I know that Saturdays for a lot of my guys are live sparring down at Joe Lozon. So I want to make sure that come Saturday morning, they're fresh and they're ready to go. So I'm going to make sure that my strength and conditioning on that Friday or even that Thursday is, it's a good training session, but we're not going to destroy them with a ton of volume. We're not going to destroy them with a ton of sort of high intensity work. It's going to be something where they're going to come in, they're going to get a good lift in. We're going to develop whatever qualities we're trying to develop, but I need to make sure that we're setting them up for whatever their next session is. And then I think as we get a little bit deeper into their fight camps, there are certain times where we have to look at what qualities do they need the most. Like if I've got a 12-week camp, it's really easy for me to program out. But oftentimes we don't get a 12-week camp. We could say, hey, I'm fighting in 4 weeks. It really depends on the scenario. A lot of these guys, man, if they're, fighting on a 4-week notice, and a lot of the times, they need to really focus on their cardiovascular system for the next 4 weeks because they haven't been doing anything, or, maybe they haven't been doing any type of sparring or live rolling or any stand-up work. So maybe they should be focusing on the more situational stuff. And that's when you really just have to talk to the coaches. And I'll text, the guys and the managers and say, hey, how did so-and-so look, or anything that they could use, or, is there anything you're seeing? Are they tired? Are they deflated? Give me some insight so I can change things to make sure that they're performing at their highest level. But if you've worked with any type of fighter, when they're about 12 to 14 days out, they're already like, I just can't wait to fight. And I just want to get this over with. So it's a long and tedious process for sure. But I think communication with the other coaches is really the most important thing.
Kyle, talk to us about, you have a fight this Saturday coming up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Joe Lozon's fighting. And actually Mike has 2 guys fighting down in Brooklyn as well.
Oh, nice.
And Anthony, aren't you in New York City somewhere, Anthony?
I'm just above New York City. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I might have to make my way up and find you somewhere. So we can talk in person, but yeah, I really like what Mike was saying, and he's hitting the nail on the head of a lot of stuff on this. That's why I tried to jump on his podcast with you. But yeah, I think there's been little tricky things that I've found too that could kind of help you add some volume in. Kind of like Mike was saying, lower body endurance, including sleds. Where I think things like sled work, doing things like sleds, and then even kind of microdosing, like taking some of Derek Hansen's ideas, which I'm not even sure if it was his idea to start, but I think maybe Charlie Francis or something like that. But microdosing as far as, hey, putting some elements of an active warm up in where you're trying to get, some movement in there. I try to, give my guys some warm ups that they can do on their own before some of these other sessions. So you can add some of, quote, your stuff in there, and then some stretching and keeping things like trap bar deadlifts concentric only. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but there's some little things that I think you can add in to try to keep, a little bit more weight room volume that's concentric only, and that doesn't take away from the guy totally or girl totally that you're working with. So I think there's little sneaky things that you might be able to add in there to keep strength conditioning volume up without taking a huge toll on the fighters.
Kyle, how do you, like, these guys get injured a lot, and there has to be changes. Like we were talking with Mike earlier, you got to have that ability to make those quick and effective changes for each athlete. How do you approach that with the injuries?
Yeah. So injuries, I mean, if somebody say, someone has a banged up wrist or hand, which is pretty common, even, you'll get a lot of elbows too, but I feel like wrists and hands are pretty common. And you leave even little tweaks in the back, but yeah, it's really creativity on the coach, so if a guy say, has a really hurt right hand, you have to figure out, partner up, they can do dumbbell rows with their left hand, and then you kind of give them manual resistance with the elbow on the other side. Stuff like that, Anthony, where you're just trying to get creative just to keep the person working. And if they're really, if it's really bad and they can't spar or do some of this other training that they kind of need to kind of get that stimulus, that's when you can insert some of these other cardio circuits that maybe we were making fun of earlier in the call. But some of these things that are like a big circuit training session with a minute rest between for rounds. I've found that to be, when a guy gets so banged up or his schedule gets thrown off, because in reality, in the real world of MMA, they don't always have, there can be sparring partners that cancel. So sparring session, sparring has to be cut back or something like that. That's where you can insert some of these other methods that maybe, aren't crazy Bosu ball exercises, but definitely, circuits with battle ropes, airdynes, sleds back and forth, med ball drills, and then minute rest. That's where you can kind of insert some of these things. So really when they get injured, which is often, you have to get creative. That's kind of why you write your programs in pencil, and your 12-week plan that you have created usually goes out the window pretty fast with these guys.
Yeah. Mike, talk to us about that, managing injuries.
Yeah, I had to laugh when, Kyle said, make sure it's written in pencil, because that is absolutely every single program. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've written a program. I'm like, this is sweet. Like, this is it. We've got all aspects of what we need. I was so impressed with myself. And then then I went to go train the guys to be like, oh yeah, my back's all jazzed up. I'm like, oh man, but I had this really awesome deadlift plan and blah, blah, blah. So literally I can't tell you how many pencils and notebook pads I just go through, and the programs, they look awful. By the time they're done, they're not those fancy Excel spreadsheets where everything looks perfect. I mean, it's got erase marks, it's got rips, it looks absolute. It looks like absolute rubbish, because it really is. You're always changing things. And, for me, we're lucky because we have some really good physical therapists that we work with in the area. So, I can reach out to them and just say, hey, what would you like me to add to their program to help speed up the injury, the healing process rather, or what are those things that, I should avoid? And I think one of the things that I approach, training in general is, the kind of the whole idea of what Gray Cook talks about in the FMS crew is, the first thing is protect. And if we can look at a program and just eliminate the exercises or the movements that could be contraindicated, then that's one of the first things that we can do, is just make sure we're not going to give them something that's going to potentially make things worse. And I always try to do that, is let's get rid of the things we don't need. And then from there, honestly, I mean, the majority of my personal training clients have some sort of injury history, whether it's a knee or it's a back. So I can kind of use that skill set to help the guys with the elbows and the shoulders and the knees. And that's just kind of what I do anyways with my private clients. So I'm lucky that, I can do a lot of that, but I absolutely reach out to, a lot of the clinicians that work with these fighters. We also have an in-house physical therapist that I run stuff off all the time and try to get advice. So I think having an understanding of, rehab a little bit is a really good skill set to have when it comes to working with fighters.
Yeah. And just like Mike said, I mean, the rule of thumb is really the do no harm. And that's with everybody. It's never a good time for anybody to get an injury, but my goodness, the MMA strength conditioning space is really a kind of a word of mouth thing. And if you want to get out of the club, just start hurting guys. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you don't want to train MMA people anymore, hurt them so they can't really go make their livelihood or make it harder on them. So yeah, the do no harm, man. That is the biggest thing.
Very cool. Guys, I want to just, you guys have been very polite so far. To be honest, with that original post, I know some of the things that you guys would have liked to have said, probably didn't want to put on Facebook. But I just want you to talk about what, I'll give you guys each 30 seconds, let's say. Kyle, first what is annoying you about the training that you see, or this idea, the way some people approach the training to MMA that annoys you about it, that you want everyone to stop and because it's hurting those fighters or the MMA industry?
I think, Anthony, I would say it's probably the biggest thing that annoys me, I think, with strength conditioning, maybe in general, is the overcomplication of this. I saw a post the other day that someone said, unless you've read Super Training or you've read Transfer and Training to Sport or the Russian manuals, that you shouldn't train anybody. And I can't think of anything that I hate more than that thought. You'll hear these people say this, things like that, and that they need to get really, really complex. When you go and watch them train their athletes, they're not doing any of that stuff. Because in the real world, people are just making things simple, just stuff that people can actually execute that make a difference. It's not all this over a complication, trying to work some obscure energy system that not even the coach himself even knows what the heck he's talking about. So I think in general, my general annoyance with overall the strength conditioning thing is just everyone trying to make it overcomplicated and kind of almost lying about what they're doing. I don't think anybody does that. I think a lot more people have the approach like Mike does, like I do, like people at Boyle's and EXOS do, where it's just good, solid training over a consistent period of time that's going to yield the best results, not all this other stuff.
Yep. Go ahead, Mike.
For me, when it comes to sort of definitely working with fighters, I think when people try to get too overly creative with sports-specific training, and, it's one of those things where, all of a sudden you see people like, okay, you're going to hit a bag and then we're going to kick you in the stomach, or you're going to throw punches with these heavy dumbbells, or you're replicate all of the movements you see in mixed martial arts with some sort of band or external load. And honestly, it just doesn't make sense to me. And it's one of those things. And listen, I've been guilty of it as well. I mean, you try to get creative, right? And say, well, how would this help this? And how would this help this? And as you start to work with more and more fighters, you realize, man, that's just useless. Like I'm guilty of it, man. I've done a lot of dumb things. And, we really got to keep it simple and just, it doesn't need to be overly complicated. And honestly, if you do see overly complicated stuff, it's usually from a social media standpoint and someone's putting it out there to get some likes or get a cool drill. And there's nothing wrong with being creative and having new ideas. I don't think that's it, but I think it's a scenario where we've got to really keep it simple. And, I've been working with some of my fighters for almost 5 years now. And I look at my old programs and I'm like, what was I doing? I was like, I was an idiot. But what I was doing is I was honestly just replicating some of the stuff that I was reading. And I thought that was the right thing. As I got a little bit deeper, I realized, man, I got to keep it simple because we don't have time for this other fluff.
Absolutely, guys. And one last question in terms of, money's no object right now. And I'm going to say, you're going to open up a facility to train fighters. Talk to me what that looks like in terms of the team, and how, again, let's give you each a minute on this one, and what would be the ideal situation so we could still try to replicate that, even if we don't have that specific facility. How would you like this to kind of run?
Well, Anthony, I feel like your pretend scenario is kind of what I have with the government and with military training. Is sometimes we have a budget that's very high and we can just make things as we want. But if I was to build a fight team, there's probably some gyms out there that already look like this. But you'd have a big mat space where there can be jiu-jitsu, wrestling. There's boxing space, and then there's strength conditioning with a little bit of therapy. It would kind of almost be like, not trying to constantly talk about EXOS or Boyle's, but it would be kind of like those places, but with a couple John Paloffs in the corner. And then you also have your MMA training center kind of on the side, and maybe even some cool stuff like they have at the UFCPI right now, as far as some data tracking, some heart rate monitors, some analytic type stuff, a team of, sports scientists in the back that could that could do it. And maybe we still wouldn't be able to, capture the complexity of what's going on, like the physiology of what's going on in these competitions. But it'd certainly be fun to work in that type of environment. And maybe it already exists at the UFCPI. I haven't been there yet, but I feel like that would be a really, really interesting scenario and an interesting place to try to get a hold of what exactly is going on inside of a cage standpoint. It's just so new. So I just think that would be interesting and it'd be really fun to see.
Cool. Mike, anything to add to that?
I definitely agree. I would love to have just a little bit more mat space. And, one thing that I would love to be able to do is, I train jujitsu and I compete a little bit. I'm not fantastic by any stretch, but I think just getting around a lot of these high-level coaches and really understanding how they teach and how they break down drills and moves would be really good. And I think it'd be good for a lot of coaches just to kind of see it a little bit into more detail. But like Kyle said, man, I wish we had, I guess for me, I wish I had some more space where these guys could focus on just kind of soft tissue health and recovery. And, I wish we were able to do stuff like have some Normatex here and, have some hot tubs and do all the things that we could really focus on the recovery strategies. I feel like that would be incredibly beneficial because these guys are just going all over the place. So if I had it my way, I would love to have those ways, not those ways, but I would love to have sort of the toys and all of the necessary devices to just help these guys with staying healthy and honestly, just make it a basic strength and conditioning facility. Obviously it'd be great to have, like Kyle said, the sport science stuff, but I just think if we could find a way to really enable them to have a one-stop shop where they could get their therapy, their soft tissue work, their recovery, maybe even some nutritional components, I think that would be like the ultimate way to help these guys out.
Absolutely. And it sounds like, again, what I was alluding to earlier with this idea about communicating, right? About this building this team where that communication is facilitated much easier. And like, if you're all in the same place and like Kyle said, the original athlete's performance with the therapy in the middle of the room and the hot tubs outside and the cold plunge pools and the break rooms and the sports psychologist and nutrition on hand, having that team all in one area would really, and that seems to be the hardest thing to replicate for any of us in any sport.
Yeah, and I feel like that would be really fun too. Actually, if you had a boxing coach, in the weight room with you all the time, and you were showing them a technique on a men bell drill, I'd love to get the boxing coach's input, which I used to train, our boxing and jiu-jitsu coaches. So I would love to hear their wisdom sometime on some of this stuff. But I feel like it would be really neat to teach them certain things with movement and power production, and then have a boxing coach or jiu-jitsu coach stand by and go, I think this could apply directly to what we're doing if we did it this way. I feel like that would be kind of an interesting breeding ground of ideas. So yeah, that would be really neat.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, boys. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. I thought this was just something different that we could do and get you guys on and talking about some of the things that are out there, the misconceptions and answering these questions about the team and performance and the qualities, the various qualities and program design. So I really appreciate both of you guys. I want to wish you both luck this week in Brooklyn, and thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having us, man.
All right, that's going to do for episode 229 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Parry and the folks over at Perform Better. Couldn't do it without him. Right now, Perform Better, there's free shipping on orders over $59. Restrictions do apply, so check out the site for more info. The next one-day seminar is in Atlanta, April 28th. That's a Saturday. Josh Henkin, Charlie Weingroff, Martin Rooney, and Mike Boyle. Check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle, Mike Perry, and Kyle Holland for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning, performance enhancement, and MMA. Thanks to Adam Dowdy and Train Heroic. Head over to trainheroic.com. Start your 14-day free trial. Let them know Anthony sent you. You'll save 10% off the first year of the Train Heroic Pro Edition. Rachel Cosgrove and the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. John Treen and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. And remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name's Anthony Renna. Go to continuefit.com to sign up for the Success Series. 5 audio interviews on success in the fitness business. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.